Well, the Zags are coming off of a 91-82 loss in the Battle of Seattle versus Alabama. I'll tell you what, if you're watching this video, you're one of two things. You're either a fan of Gonzaga basketball or you are a fan of misery and watching the Bulldogs stumble. They do fall to number 5 in the polls, but we're going to talk really in depth in this video about things that we're seeing. I mean, we watched Gonzaga struggle versus Alabama, versus Tarleton State, and against Duke after coming out victorious against UCLA over Thanksgiving break. And we're really going to dive in depth to things that we're seeing, ways that we believe this team can turn it around. Now, talking about that game on Saturday in Seattle, we were there. The crowd was rocking. It was I think I would call that like an Elite Eight kind of atmosphere in a
I'd agree with that.
NBA arena, Climate Pledge Arena, real quick. Beautiful. If you get an opportunity, whether it be to watch a Kraken game or anything over there, highly suggest it. I would call that a top 5 arena in North America. Very beautiful. But let's talk about that Alabama game real quick. And going into it, we said this. We said, even though we both chose Gonzaga to come out victorious, we believe that Gonzaga would take advantage of their bigs, work the ball down low, and we did say Alabama can win this game. And the way that Alabama wins this game is by making their threes. And we were sitting in our seats right before, and we said, what's the over-under? Like, how many threes does Alabama need to hit to win this game? And we both came up with the number 11. And then you said something. You said, 11, they can win it. 12, 13, we're in the danger zone. Well, what happened? Well, they ended up making 13 threes on the day. Jaden Shackleford went 6 of 8 for 28 points. J.D. Davison went 4 of 6 from deep for 20 points. That really helped the Crimson Tide kind of play into the game plan that they wanted to. Zags ended up going 12 of 25 from the free throw line during that game as well. Before we jump into how we're going to fix this team, let's talk a little bit about what we saw in that Battle of Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a couple things kind of rear their head a little bit in that Alabama game. And I think these are some things that you've seen kind of linger a little bit for the Zags. This last three game stretch, it's been rough. And a lot of things kind of just came to a point against Alabama. I remember saying in that preview video that if Alabama came out and hit their shots, that this game could get ugly quick.
Yep.
This was a 16-point deficit at halftime. It was the Zags' largest halftime deficit since Memphis in 2009, I believe it was. So, I mean, you haven't seen Gonzaga really get jumped on like this. I mean, even against Baylor, we just talked about this. That was a 10-point game at halftime in the national championship.
Clawed back into it.
The Zags found themselves very quickly in a position that they were not accustomed to, and defensively, it was obviously, I think, the big cause for that. They gave up 51 in the first half. You just can't do that and expect to win basketball games. Like you said, Jaden Shackleford was an absolute bucket out there on the court. I think he was 6 of 7 from 3 in the first half. So, I mean, he came out just red hot. And I think they really did a good job of taking advantage of what they've seen on film. They really did a good job. Nate Oates and his coaching staff, I think, really digested those last 2 games that were rough for Gonzaga, saw some things they could take advantage of. And Shackleford, don't get me wrong, he had a couple shots that were just flat out buckets. They weren't wide open looks, but when you're an elite shooter like that and you get hot, you're gonna get some to go. But they did a good job of taking advantage of rotations. And Quinterly really did a good job of taking advantage of Timmy in the pick and rolls. We've seen that be an issue again all the way back to the Baylor game. He just tends to get a little bit too high on the hedges, which then forces your other defenders to rotate quicker. And we just haven't seen that communication, those rotations be as on point. Second half of that game, the Zags did a little bit better job of getting their defense rolling, helping their defense, by starting the offense, getting some turnovers. We saw the young guys really step up in that second half. But again, much like we've seen, it came down to the end of that game, and the Zags just could not close that game out. And, of course, Alabama walks out with a win.
In the last 3 games versus Duke, Tarleton, and Bama, the Zags are 46% from the field. That's down from 57% from the field the first 6 games. And they've only shot 57% from the free throw line the last 3 games. They shot 73% from the line the first 6 games. And so we've said in this last few videos that the blueprint is out on how to beat this Gonzaga team. Alabama came out and just executed on that. I do want to talk about, rotations. And for me, I put a tweet out after the game that I believed that Gonzaga was extremely outcoached in this game, and I stand by that. I mean, you got to understand, I love Mark Few. Been around Mark Few, great, human being and basketball coach. Obviously, like we can't always, when you're going to make a point, it's not always in the grand scheme of things. Mark Few is a top 5 coach in the NCAA. He will deservingly end up in the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. Gonzaga does not get to the point that they're at without him, but we have to make a point here, and there's a reason that Arizona is close to being a top 10 team. Tommy Lloyd, a lot of Zag fans may not understand what his role was on game day. I think a lot of people viewed him as, he's able to recruit these international guys. True, but he also ran the rotations of this team. And this isn't a shot at B-Mike at all, who is one of the hardest working coaches in college basketball. But B-Mike's never had to do that before. And this team, I mean, come on, this is a very hard team to figure out. You got 2 potential All-American bigs that you got to figure out a way to get on the floor, space the floor. You got, 3 McDonald's All-Americans, and freshmen that you have to figure out to get minutes for as well. And they just haven't figured out the rotations yet. I mean, what I saw in this Alabama game is Drew Timme, who is not the most in shape or athletic guy on this Gonzaga roster, was left out there for 10 minutes. Well, when you leave your preseason All-American on the floor the first 10 minutes of the game, then what happens? Well, he's going to have to sit on the bench for a lot of the rest of the first half, which we saw. Felt like the rotations got out of place. And then really the glaring thing was that Chet Holmgren was not on the floor the last 6 minutes. I mean, we've said off air that Chet Holmgren is what makes this team a national championship contender. If you take him off of this team, they are a good team. They are not a top 5 team in the country. They're just not. They're a very good team, but Chet Holmgren changes everything. He changes the defensive pressure, the intensity, and they took him out the last 6 minutes, and we were just sitting there pulling our hair inside the arena. Like, how do you not have Chet Holmgren in the game right there? I just think that these rotations, I'm very interested. We're going to be at that Merrimack game tomorrow, and I've never been more interested to watch a team that the Zags should beat by 40 just to see, what do these rotations look like? Do we start to see some minutes creep up for some guys? And that's where I want to get into this is Nolan Hickman. We were both very excited going into the season about what he could be for this Gonzaga basketball team. And we've seen that and more. I mean, his efficiency, his maturity, the way he's able to, we talk a lot about, we need some dogs. We need some guys who, Corey Kispert, Jalen Suggs last year, those guys were dogs. They were going to come out with that intensity. And Nolan Hickman is one of the few guys on this team we've seen so far who has that. And what I'm very interested to see is how he starts to eat into other guys' minutes. Mark Few will not bench Andrew Nembhard for Nolan Hickman. I know there's some talk out there in Zagland about wanting that to happen. But I remember, I had a basketball coach when I was in high school that said, it doesn't matter, guys, who starts. It matters who's on the floor at the end of the game. And we're starting to see that with Nolan Hickman, that he's more time and time again being on the floor in critical positions. And so I'm very interested to see how his minutes creep up and how his role expands on this team.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a huge change that we could see that could really help this offense. I mean, Nolan Hickman, you talk about his efficiency. He's averaging 0.4 turnovers a game through 20 minutes a game. That's really unheard of in terms of taking care of the ball. Andrew Nembhard averages about 1 turnover every 11 and a half minutes or so. So it really kind of puts that into perspective for you in terms of how good Hickman is, especially as a freshman, in terms of taking care of that ball. That's normally where you see freshmen struggle, is just being poised and taking care of the ball, making good decisions. And we've seen him do that. He's also shooting 38.5% from 3 on, I think, 26 attempts from the year. So it's not a low volume situation. When he was 2 of 3 against Alabama. So it's a guy that is, you can tell he's ready for the minutes. I think he brings a lot to this offense in terms of just shooting where we may not have it. Andrew Nembhard struggled a little bit, particularly the last 4 or 5 games. He struggled from 3. So, having somebody like that who can come off the bench, take care of the ball, spread the floor for you, give your bigs room to operate because you can't leave him out there. It's something that it's going to earn him more minutes. And, we talk about as well just his ability out there to run this offense. I think his assists, you might look at his assists and just say they're a little bit low, but you give him more minutes, I think, especially with the ones.
More volume overall.
Yeah, he's a great passer. Just give him the volume out there, and he's got that dog in him. You can see it. He doesn't back down from these big moments, and we talked about that. This team's just kind of lacking those alpha mentalities out there, and I think if you really put Hickman in a position to shine, I think you could see that personality come out of him and be a big difference maker for these Zags.
Well, in the second half versus Alabama, he scored 9 straight points for the Zags. And so we'll see what his minutes look like moving forward. Mark Few, and I'll say this is really the last 5 to 7 years, has really changed the style of play he wants to play at Gonzaga. He wants to get out. He wants to run. You touched on it a little bit in terms of them being able to create offense off of defense. And what we mean by that is this team creating turnovers, getting in the passing lanes, and pushing the ball. And so I'll start here, actually, is my take during that Alabama game is that the reason that Chet was not on the floor is that Chet Holmgren is a 7-foot big who can bring the ball up the court and has plus handles for a 7-footer. I believe that Mark Few and his coaching staff are wanting him to get the ball up the floor, hit his outlet, because what happens is if he gets a rebound and he pushes the ball, it gets Gonzaga into that tempo that they want to live in versus your big gets a rebound, he brings the ball up, and what are we doing? We're playing 5-on-5 in the half court. And so what we've seen the last 3 games is this team allowing, whether it be Duke or Tarleton State, dictate the tempo of that game. And so my takeaway, I could be completely wrong. I've sat in a lot of practices watching Mark Few talk to his guys. I believe that was a reason that he was benched. I believe that they're wanting him to get the ball up the floor. I believe part of it too is, and I said this with the whole rotation thing, is that it is very difficult to create spacing when 2 of your top players on the floor are, bigs. Timmy may not be a 7-footer. He plays like one just with him getting around the rim. But let's talk about that a little bit. And I think that one big thing we're seeing with this team is the guards not being able to get to the rim. This team not being able to get out into transition. What we saw last year is Joel Ayayi, I believe 50-something% of his shots not in transition were at the rim. A legendary cutter, right?
Absolutely.
We also saw Jalen Suggs, who was obviously running the show, get to the rim 40-something% of the time. We're only seeing Andrew Nembhard do that really half the time this year. We're not seeing as many of the guards get to the rim, and I believe part of that is spacing issues. If you've got 2 guys, we've even seen some spacing issues just between Drew and Chet. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see how does this coaching staff figure out a way to create more space on the floor, because last year's team was one of the most efficient teams in college basketball history. And this is not a team that wants to get into that half-court set and settle for pick-and-pop threes all day. They're not going to beat a lot of the teams that they should with that game plan.
No, I'd agree with that. It's anytime you can get to the rim and finish at the clip that Gonzaga did last year, you're going to beat a lot of teams. And that's where, you can live with teams shooting from 3 because you're just going to make so many more 2-point field goals that it doesn't matter. But this team this year, they've struggled with that. And I think it goes back to a lot of what we've talked about as well, is just the guards handling ball pressure. And particularly when you don't have a Corey Kispert out on the floor, teams are more willing to bring help from other places. And we're seeing that this year. These guards are just getting so much ball pressure up top that's really, preventing them from getting to the rim. And the off-ball actions just haven't been as frequent as well, just because of the point that you said. When you have 2 bigs down low, there is no room for those off-ball actions. So it really comes down to spacing on this floor and just kind of getting that chemistry up. You have to give these guards other ways to score rather than just asking them all to shoot threes. I don't think they've been shooting too many threes, so I wouldn't say that's been the issue. No. But you have to allow them to be versatile scorers. And with the spacing that we've seen so far, that just hasn't been the case. So it's going to be really interesting going forward. Does it come down to a rotation change? Do we see kind of minutes differentiate between Chet and Timmy when they're on the floor? But I think that is definitely an area where the Zags can improve this, because we've seen the last 3 games, like you said in the start of this video, man, the last 3 games, the offense has struggled, and that's what allows these teams to hang around. And, this is just basketball. Anytime you let a team either lead the game for most of the game like Alabama did, or just even hang around till the end like Tarleton, at that point, rankings are out the window. It doesn't matter. That team is confident. Once they think they can win a game, they can win that game, and that is exactly what we've seen.
Let's talk about the 3 for just a second, because going into this season, that was something that was a huge question mark. Who's going to be able to shoot the 3? Rasir Bolton has been wonderful from behind the arc. We've also seen, Nolan Hickman step up, Julian Strother step up. So the issue it's not a lack of shooters. I believe that it has been a lack of. Teams are going to give Drew Timme and Anton Watson as many threes as they want. Not that we don't ever want them shooting a 3, but, it's one of those things that it's just who's taking the shots as well. I'm going to give you one thing right here that if this Gonzaga team is going to make a run to a Final Four and do what they're very capable of doing, I'm going to give you one key, and it's Drew Timme's interior positioning. We actually saw, so let's go back to Texas. The reason Drew Timme, he scored almost 40, could have scored 60 if he wanted to in that game, and the reason for it is you talk about best post footwork in the country. Well, guess what? It only works if you're down by the basket. And so during Texas, he was able to get as deep as he wanted to. And when you let Drew Timme get deep, he will eat. I mean, it's just
absolutely,
he's too good down low to not get, a bucket if you let him get deep. Well, you could tell Mick Cronin, UCLA, even though he scored like a quiet 19 in that game and the Zags rolled, it was very obvious watching that game that they did not want to let Drew Timme get deep in the post. And what we saw in that game is he made some very difficult shots, hard off the glass. I'm talking 7-8 feet, hook shots off the glass. And then versus Duke, we saw Duke push it a little further. And then we saw Tarleton push it a little further. And then versus Alabama, he was really not able to get as deep as he wanted to. And so if you're a opposing team, you're looking at the film and say, guys, if we don't let Timme get deep, whether, we're just going to physical him up or whether we're going to have a guard help, it changes the entire game. And so finding a way for this coaching staff to get Drew Timme deep, we're going to do a Texas Tech preview next week. And if Drew Timme can get deep positioning in that game, we will see a Texas repeat. If he does not, and if you watch that game last night versus Tennessee, they're going to be in for a very ugly night.
Yes, yeah, Texas Tech can make it. They can make a muddy game. So we'll get into that next week. But Drew Timme's positioning is everything about his game, like you said. And it's just, again, back to things we've already made a point in this video. The blueprint is out, and we're seeing teams now execute that blueprint better and better and better. So, for Gonzaga, I think you have to, at this point, acknowledge that you're probably not just going to get a run down the court and just let Timme go get that deep position, because that's something that is first on every opposing team's board in the locker room right now. So now you've got to figure out some different ways. We've talked about it. Is it a pick and pop with Chet up top that allows the guard to get to the rim? With Chet pick and popping, but then you've got Timme on the weak side block there. And if you've got Timme on the weak side block, that's going to really allow him to get that position while the pick and pop is happening. So you've got to, at this point, find more ways to initiate that offense you want to, because where we're at in this season is they see what you want to do, and they know, opposing teams know at this point, if you can take that away from Gonzaga, you do not let them get that early in the shot clock, that allows your ball pressure up top to get more aggressive because you take away Gonzaga's preferred option. And then at that point, you're just asking a player to make a play, which when it comes down to the end of a game, we've seen the Zags just not close out well. So really at this point, you've got to start mixing things up a little bit and get back to find different ways to get to where you want to be on the court. That's the biggest thing.
We've talked a lot about the offensive woes for this team. Let's talk real quick about defensively. We're seeing a lot of communication issues, just bad switches. I mean, especially when you get guards crossing really up at the top, you just see who's got the guy. We're letting a lot of easy buckets up through the lane, a lot of driving opportunities. But you're seeing something on the defensive end, really with some hedging that's going on that you believe is leading to some really poor rotations where if you watch the film, other teams are getting a lot of 5-on-4 opportunities versus this defense.
Yeah, it's happened a lot. And this goes back to, again, the Baylor championship game. And this is Drew Timme in the hedge situation, so pick and roll defensively. When that guard comes off the pick and roll up top, we're seeing Drew Timme really aggressively hedge that. Overhedging. And if you're not familiar with the hedge, basically what he's doing is he is coming up to help the guard that gets stuck on the screen. He's trying to play defense on that ball handler. So by overhedging, he's going too high and going above the ball handler. What that immediately allows for is an easy roll from the big, at which point you have to have a corner defender drop down to cover that roll, and then you're asking Drew Timme to now rotate to cover that help. It's not working at this point in time. Javon Quinterly for Alabama got to the rim almost at ease because our rotations were not there. And you speak of rotations too, it's not just Drew Timme. We saw a lot in the Tarleton game. Tarleton ran a play multiple times in the first half where they'd have a guard from the wing cut to the rim and another player cut from the rim back out to that same wing. And when those two players are crossing, generally speaking, you just want to switch that, especially against a team like Tarleton. They weren't a big team. You're just switching that, right? You stay out on the perimeter. If you let somebody get to the rim, at least you got a defender right there. We're seeing the Zags not switch. They end up both guarding the player at the rim. They're giving up open threes.
Yep.
So it really comes down to defensive communication, and it's a little frustrating to watch because this is something we've said a number of times this season, that this defense has the talent to be a top 5 defense. I still believe they have the talent to do that. But right now, its chemistry and communication is not there. They have not been a top 5 defense, clearly, the last few games. So going to be very interesting to see, can they get on the same page? Can they start talking more? When you haven't played together for 2, 3, 4 years, you just have to talk more out there. You have to talk things out. You can't assume that your teammate will do the right thing. So talk it out. Get those switches on point. And if you can get those switches on point, that's what allows you to then get more active in passing lanes, prevent those easy buckets, and even create some turnovers to get out and run.
That's some gold right there. I mean, that overhedging, really, to simplify it, what's happening is you're creating a 2-on-1 versus a defender where it's just a guard driving with a big roll into the basket, and if they do come over to help, you're going to leave a wide open 3. And so, if we were watching the Kraken play on Friday night, and I can tell you what, you'll always take that 5-on-4 opportunity if you can get it. The last thing I want to talk about is just how poorly this team has finished really the last few games. Alabama led by 18 early in the second half. Zags rallied to 76-72. To give them credit, they came out of halftime with their hair on fire, creating turnovers, got it down to 76-72 in front of 18,000 people. Anton Watson has a putback with 5:29 left remaining. Well, you know what? They're going to steal this one, right? Like, they were outplayed the whole game. They're going to steal this one. Well, from there, it just unraveled. The Zags end up going scoreless for 4.5 minutes until Julian Strother's dunk with 1 minute remaining. Over that span, they committed 1 turnover, went 0 of 7 from the field, including 3 straight threes. Missed the front end of a 1-and-1 on that span as well. And versus Duke, it was the same story, right? They were up 73-71 with 5 minutes remaining. Offense went scoreless again for 3 minutes and 30 seconds, had 3 turnovers, 3 errant shots, missed the front end of a 1-and-1. It's like I've seen this bad movie before. And by the end of it, the Zags were down 76-73. And so after that Duke game, we didn't get to do a recap of the game. We moved straight into a game preview. And I think both of our takeaways was, hey, who wants to step up? Somebody's going to have to step up on this team. And, I said early on, when we saw Julian Strother in that first exhibition game score 18 points in the first half, and I said, I made the prediction that he was going to become the go-to scoring option on this team. It has not held true through the last month. Is it going to be Julian Strother? Is it going to be Andrew Nembhard? Is Nolan Hickman going to be that guy? is Chet going to be on the floor and be able to step up?
Didn't think we'd be saying that.
And so I'm not giving you what the answer is versus that they're going to have to search deep, the coaching staff and the players, on how are they going to finish games. I think that they become a little predictable in big situations where teams know they're going to go back to their bread and butter and Nembhard's going to try to work it into Timmy. And teams know that. They're able to create turnovers off of that. And so I would like to see, a lot of end game situations, finding a way, like we talk about rotations. What is that rotation, the final 4 minutes, that's going to lead to this team pulling out close games? I mean, they're going to get into WCC play. They're going to get every team's best shot, and they're going to be in some close games. And if you can close out games, you're going to end up being a number one seed. If you can't, this season could completely fall off the rails for this Gonzaga basketball team. Let us know down in the comments what you're seeing, things you want to see this team work on as well. Hopefully we'll see a very strong outing tomorrow night versus Merrimack. We will be doing a Texas Tech preview next week as well, as we get really one more big non-conference game. They play UW on Sunday as well. So if you're not already, make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, let us know down in the comments how you're feeling about this Gonzaga basketball team.